We're looking at Sayyid Nursi's Risale-i Nur. We're looking at 6 pillars, 6 conceptual pillars. Yesterday we started off by looking at Sayyid Nursi's theology of the names. Assalamu alaikum. Theology of the beautiful names, in which Sayyid Nursi looks at the whole of creation like a cosmic book. We then went on to look at Sayyid Nursi's conception of the human I, the human ana, the ego or the self. And the third pillar was Sayyid Nursi's understanding of a twin concept known as self-referentiality and other indicativeness. Mana ismi, mana harfi. If you're interested, we can give you possibly some notes on that after. What I want to do today is to look at the other 3 pillars, the other 3 conceptual pillars of Nursian thought. And the 4th pillar concerns the issue of cause and effect, or causation. This is one of, maybe we can close the door because there's noise.
Yeah.
This is one of Nursi's key concepts. His concept of ana, his concept of the human ego, the human I, is key to understanding how we read the cosmic book. And his concept of self-referentiality and other indicativeness is key to how we actually use that ana in order to read. Today, we have another very, very key concept in Nursi's Risale-i Nur, and that is the issue of cause and effect, the issue of nature. And the example here on the slide, when fire touches paper and paper ignites, is the fire the cause of the ignition? Or is the effect, namely the flames which consume the paper, produced directly by God? So Sayyid Nursi has an extended discussion about nature, about cause and effect. Because we live in a causal realm. We live in the world of cause and effect. Now, medieval Muslim theologians, particularly the Ash'arites, denied the existence of a connection between cause and effect, independently of God. So they actually denied that there is a necessary connection between cause and effect. And they said God creates everything directly. Centuries later, Ghazali added to the debate, saying that this phenomenon of cause and effect that we're all used to is in fact only apparent. So cause and effect and the relationship is only an apparent relationship. Ghazali said, this idea that we have that causes create their effects is caused by habit. Because we are used to seeing causes and effects, we think that a cause actually has an effect. This is a product of habit, according to Ghazali. And later, David Hume, in Western philosophy, also said that there is no necessary connection between cause and effect. It's something that we see habitually, and we think there is a necessary relationship. So every time I take the cup, when I open my fingers, it drops. What is the cause? The cause is my fingers opening, the cup dropping. David Hume said no. The cause is not my hand opening. There is no necessary connection between opening my fingers and the dropping of the cup. It's because we see it over and over again, we think there's a necessary connection. He said there is no necessary connection. It's only because we see these things habitually. Now, this may seem to us very strange, because we live in a causal world, we live in a post-enlightenment scientific world where everything is based on cause and effect. Science operates on cause and effect. So to tell people that, there is no connection between cause and effect, and that everything is actually created independently by God, strikes us as very strange. So for Ghazali, the opening of the hand is one event, the falling of the cup is another event, and they are separate events, both created by God independently of each other, but together. So for Ghazali, for David Hume, and for other philosophers, both Muslim and non-Muslim philosophers, this phenomenon of cause and effect, which we're all used to, is only apparent. It's a result of the habit that we have of linking together events which occur together, such as the striking of a match. Does anyone have a box of matches? No? No one here smokes. Alhamdulillah. The striking of a match and the touching of the match to the paper and the paper catching a light. For us, it's just very natural. This is a very natural thing. Now, to claim that the fire is the cause of the paper being reduced to ashes, for Ghazali, is an insult to divine power. For Ghazali, it is a slur on God's power. If you say that the cause of the fire is the match, for Ghazali, this is wrong. Because if causes actually possess the ability needed to bring an effect into being, what happens to God's role? God's role becomes redundant. And God then is reduced to being a first mover, a prime mover, who sets everything in motion at the beginning and then sits back as creation unfolds itself. This is a very Christian understanding of God as the first mover. So God, at the very beginning of creation, starts the ball rolling. Yeah, like if you play snooker or billiards or pool, you hit the ball with the cue, and then the ball moves on itself. So this is a very Christian understanding of how God works in creation. Ghazali said this is wrong. And we have to actually revisit and rethink our understanding of causality. Now, the early medieval theologians were motivated to reject causation because they felt that it undermined God's power. They felt that it was an insult to God's power. Sayyid Nursi was moved to reject causation for a similar reason. But by Nursi's time, the goalposts had changed. The discourse had changed. Ghazali and the medieval theologians had as their intellectual opponents the Muslim philosophers. But Nursi had different opponents. Nursi's era, Nursi's time was the growth of scientific materialism. And that is basically what we have now in our age. It is the age of scientific materialism. And scientific materialism is based on the foundation that causes are very real. And that if I open my fingers, that is the cause of the cup dropping. Scientific materialism is based on that understanding. Causes are real and they actually do produce effects. Now, Nursi's most impressive teachings on the issue of cause and effect appear in part of the Risale known as the Treatise on Nature. Tabiat Risalasi, the Treatise on Nature. And in the Treatise on Nature, Nursi talks about a number of propositions which, he says, are used by everyday people, but which imply unbelief. So he says that people, even believers, use these propositions But these propositions imply unbelief. One of them is that causes create. If we say causes create, this implies unbelief. But we say it. Another is the assertion that things create themselves, or things form themselves. How does the world come into existence? Oh, it forms itself. It's natural, Mother Nature, etc. So there are several assumptions which people use. Causes create, things form themselves, nature creates. Nursi says these imply belief, unbelief. He says these propositions are actually forwarded by believers who are unaware of what they're saying. They're unaware of the fact that what they're saying implies unbelief. So what Nursi does in this short piece of writing, he takes each proposition in turn and he attempts to demonstrate what he considers to be the bankruptcy of these three central planks of naturalist, atheist belief in causality. And his goal, his motive in this, is to show that once we've rejected these three ways, causes create, things form themselves, nature creates. Nursi says once we've rejected these three, we reach a fourth proposition. And that proposition is the way of divine unity, Tawheed. That God creates directly, without any causal interference. So he says, according to this fourth way, the created realm, the cosmos, the world, is a place where God's works are constant and continuous. The created realm is a realm where God's works are constant and continuous. Nursi says that God has two ways of creating. These two ways are known as ibda and insha. Ibda, he explains, that is, he brings a being into existence out of nothing, out of non-existence, and creates everything necessary for it, also out of nothing, and places those necessities in its hand. The second way of creation is through what Nursi calls insha. And he explains it. That is, he forms certain beings out of the elements of the universe in order to demonstrate subtle instances of wisdom, like displaying the perfections of his wisdom and the manifestations of many of his names. Through the law of providing, he sends particles and matter, which are dependent on his command, to these beings and employs the particles in them. Okay, what do these actually mean in practice? Well, the first type of creation, or ibda creation, may be understood in the sense of instantaneous creation. God is creating at every instant. While insha, we can understand as developmental creation, which means we see creation growth over time. And the best way to actually demonstrate that, or to illustrate that, is by thinking of a film. If you have a film, a feature film, when you watch the film, there is growth and there is movement. One thing happens, another thing happens, another thing happens. So we see progression over time. For example, if you take a film of a baby in the womb, you can see over 9 months, if you have this film, you can see over 9 months the baby progressing from a single cell to a double cell, multiplying and then growing arms and legs and eyes and everything. Now, if you take that film is made up of individual frames. So if you slow the film down, you will see that the film is made up of numerous individual frames. What Nursi is saying is that God's creation, it's two kinds of creation. The first is that instantaneous creation, which is similar to one frame of a film. The second kind of creation is that kind of creation that we see, which is gradual growth, developmental creation. So we only see insha. We only see the developmental kind of creation. We don't see ibda, which is instantaneous. So you can see the instantaneous creation as like horizontal creation by God at every second, at every instant. While developmental creation is over time. So I want to stop that there and ask you whether you have any questions, because these are quite subtle concepts.
So could you just repeat the last thing you said? We only see insha, but we don't see ibda.
We don't see ibda. So when we watch a film, the frames are moving. And we see motion and we see development. But actually, if you slow it down and if you stop the film, every frame, every individual frame, is a distinct and separate creation. Is this making sense? What do you think is why should this be important? Why do you think why do you think Nursi even talks about this?
Because he's dealing with a scientific, materialistic scientific challenge, right? And people are being swayed by scientific materialism as the way to progress in terms of ideas and thoughts. And he's saying, guys, no. We're not denying that, but at the same time, we have to look at things more in depth, right? Maybe his answer to the scientific materialism, scientific thought quickly, insha, to some extent. It's responsible. And it does, it's the one that the substance that we don't see. But overall, as you said, the way of divine unity is a combination of both.
Yes. Yeah.
Combination of both.
Yeah.
And that's what we should be, that's the epistemology that we should be framing our thoughts, minds, and terms.
What are you going to say?
So would this be an outright rejection of scientific method and of causality?
It's not a rejection of scientific method. It's not a rejection of scientific... It's a rejection of maybe the scientific concept of causes. That causes actually do create. If causes actually do create, what happens to God's power? What is God's position? God is relegated then to someone who starts everything off and then lets everything continue. So, for example, if I have, do you know what dominoes are?
Yeah.
If I have a row of dominoes, so if God is here and there is a row of dominoes, billions of dominoes, and he starts the first domino, and then it carries on. Why is that problematic? Why is that problematic?
Because we've assumed it just come out of nowhere, right? And it's just...
Well, no, it hasn't come out of nowhere because God starts it.
It's objectifies God as the prime mover, and then it becomes...
God becomes the prime mover.
But he becomes...
we remove God from the whole process.
Right.
We remove God from the whole process. And we give the power, we attribute the power to causes.
Right.
We give the power to causes. We take the power from God and we give it to causes. And Nursi is saying that if you remove God from creation, you remove God from your life as well.
And so you could say, it's a rejection of the theology of the names and attributes.
It is also a rejection of the theology of the names, yes.
Right. And then therefore, and also you have an issue of the human eye and the ana.
Yes, of course, absolutely. Absolutely. Because everything that happens is not the work of God, it's the work of causes.
Right.
This is how we would see it. if we relegate God to this position at the beginning of creation, whenever that is,
Right.
and personally I don't think there is a beginning, but that's another issue completely,
Right.
then God is the first mover, and then everything is happening then without any reference to God. So what does this do? It takes God out of the equation, and it makes our lives completely secular.
Right.
Completely secular. Because God is not involved in the creation. Nursi, this is what Nursi is fighting against.
Right.
That atheistic materialism and naturalism is taking God out of the picture.
But the question we have to ask today, okay, given our situation, we have to accept the reality of there will be people. What I'm saying is, people will look at Nursi and say this guy's a fundamentalist, right? I mean, for example, I'm just.
If they look at this, if they look at this,
yeah, this guy's a fundamentalist. He can't accept the fact that there are people who are always going to be, who will never accept God or nature and so on and so. So you have to be tolerant with me. I have to be tolerant with you, or I don't have to be tolerant with you. So.
But you can turn around and you can say that, look, atheistic materialists have also said there is no necessary connection between a cause and its effect.
Right. And that's a fundamental problem.
No, it's not a problem, because we can agree with it. We can agree with that.
Right.
We can say that your own tradition, you know, you have people who've said that there is no necessary connection between cause and effect.
David
So
Hume.
why, yeah, David Hume.
Yeah.
So why would they accuse him of being a fundamentalist?
Right. Okay. So then that's.
They might accuse him of being crazy,
Right.
but not necessarily a
So
fundamentalist.
essentially, he's given us a very good framework to counter this argument, because fundamentally, if you can't, it's a very sophisticated argument, because it's an issue of the other again.
Yes.
Yeah, because you're letting yourself not see the truth. You're rejecting it.
Yeah. Now, going back to what Nursi is saying, these two kinds of creation, Ibda and Insha, we find them in the Quran. For example, in verse 36:82, we read that when God wants to create something, he says, Kun fayakun.
Yeah.
He says, Kun, be, fayakun, and it comes into existence. So this is an indication of Ibda. Whenever God wants to create something, he says, be, and then that thing exists, comes into existence. But in other verses, such as verse 23:78, there is the notion of composition and development, of things being created from other things. So for example, you plant a seed in the soil, you give it water, the plant grows. This is insha. It's development over time. And this is what we see. We only see the insha, which is why we're tricked into thinking that causes actually create.
Right.
If we saw that God was creating directly at every instant, how would you deny God?
So the question then becomes, Colin, right? Some people say, I'm just
Yeah,
this morning we were listening to LDC,
Yes.
and just reading Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the senior religious figure, saying
Yeah.
we're talking about the Paris issue. Then why is God, as whether you're a believer or not, why is he playing tricks on us? Is that fair? Is that right? Is that mean?
No, it's not a trick, it's the test. We are here for a test. Yeah? In order to develop, in order to grow, there is a test. We are all subjected to the test. And the test is that we see everything causally. But we have to go behind that. We have to look further, we have to look behind that. And to discover what lies beneath. That's part of our test. So it's not that we're being tricked, but it's part of our test as human beings, if we believe that we're being tested by God. So these two kinds of creation are not mutually exclusive. For Nursi, they go together, they work together. So on one level, the level of insha, each being is seen to be formed from other beings that developed over time, such as the baby growing in the womb.
Yeah.
And now they can take wonderful films of babies growing in the womb.
Yeah.
And you can see right from that very, very first, sign of life in the baby growing over 9 months, you see the development of the child. So the nourishment and the growth of the embryo in the womb is a very good example. But on a more fundamental level, this child in the womb is being created and recreated continuously from instant to instant by God, apparently from nothing. Apparently from nothing. Like the frames of a film. So if we were to slow down our activity, you would see that it is frame by frame by frame by frame separate. And each one is created by God, independently of the other frames. But when you put them together, of course, you see a kind of process or development. So on the level of Insha, the creation of a being is like the unfolding of a film. It is developmental, with one scene giving rise to the next scene in an unbroken sequence. On the level of Ibda, each being is made up of a succession of instants. So we are all made up of a succession of instants, like the individual frames of a film. Now, our perception of creation as Insha happens because of our inability to see the hand of God directly. We cannot see the hand of God directly. We cannot see God's creation directly. His act of creating. Because we are inside space and time. We are immersed in space and time. This means basically we see the moving film. We don't see the individual frames. So on the level of the visible realm, we see God's creative act in terms of a causal sequence. We see cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect. But on the level that's hidden from us, on the level of the unseen, God creates each effect directly and recreates continuously. He creates the cause, he creates the effect. We make a false link between the two. But that link is necessary, because we have to live in a causal world. So, the whole point of Nursi's discussion of cause and effect is to bring the focus back on God. Because Nursi was writing at a time when atheistic materialism in Turkey, with the establishment of the Turkish Republic, atheistic materialism was growing very fast. And the danger was that God was being taken out of the picture. God was being taken out of the equation. So if you think about the Christian understanding, and if you look at the Bible, look at the opening verses where it talks about God creating the world in 6 days and then resting on the seventh. This gives us an idea of a God who starts the creation and then sits back while the creation unfolds. Nursi says this is wrong. Because a God who starts it off and then sits back is not a God who is involved with us at every instant, at every second, at every minute of the day. Nursi wants to bring the focus back on God, who is seen not as someone who creates the world in 6 days and rests on the seventh, runs low on energy, as the sister said, but as a God whose creation is continuous. And if God were for 1 instant, for 1 second to withdraw from the creation, everything would be in chaos. Actually, everything would crumble into oblivion, would disappear. So Nursi's insistence is that God is a working God. Yes?
Yes.
Not an absent God. You know, like an absentee landlord. So the insistence that the God of Islam is a working God who continuously creates and recreates everything from instant to instant prevents us from giving ownership to causes. This is the reason that Nursi is insistent. It prevents us from attributing things to causes. And at the same time, going back to what you said about the connection with Anna, it prevents us from attributing things to Anna. Yes? So, as Nursi points out, this desire that we have to give the power to causes actually comes from our desire to give power to ourselves.
Right.
So we have an investment in causality. We want to give the power to the causes so that we can also give power to ourselves. Because we can only claim ownership over our own acts if we say that everything owns itself. This is a key to understanding naturalism. This is a key to understanding atheistic materialism. Everything owns itself. Every cause owns itself and creates the effect. This then gives us the justification to own our own actions. So, this rejection by Nursi of any causal relationship between beings is also a rejection of the notion of human ownership of acts and attributes. We do not own our own acts because our acts are created by God directly. So when I do this, I can't say that I dropped the cup. All I can say is that I open my fingers. After that, God creates the dropping. This is what Nursi is saying. Because if we don't believe that, then we believe that things own themselves and own their own effects. And this is dangerous. This is shirk, actually. So this is basically Nursi's understanding of nature and of cause and effect. And that is the fourth pillar.